On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christys.
And I'm Mercy Muroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Muroki, and Patrick Christys on your TV, radio and online. We're here with you until midday with a show jam-packed with all of today's big stories. There are very big stories in the papers today. Lots of expert guests as well, and lots of opinion.
Indeed, yes. What is going on with Rwanda and our asylum seeker system? I might have a little bit of inside info on that for you right at the start of the show, so we'll see what's happening there. I suspect the problem lies a lot closer to home, but get those views coming in, GB Views at gbnews.uk. But first, time for the latest news.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Asylum seekers who cross the English Channel will be flown to Rwanda for processing under new government plans. An initial £120 million is expected to be given to the Rwandan government under the controversial scheme. Refugee charities are describing the move as cruel, saying the decision will lead to more chaos and suffering. In a speech on tackling illegal migration, the Prime Minister is expected to say action is needed to combat people smugglers. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News the plan is too expensive and won't work.
It's unworkable. It's incredibly expensive. A similar scheme in Australia was found to have cost £1.7 million per person, per asylum seeker. And so there are much more effective ways of us dealing with this appalling situation.
Dozens of NHS patients have waited more than 3 years for hospital care in England because of the growing backlog. More than 6 million people are currently on the waiting list, with 23,000 waiting over 2 years to start routine treatment. Top surgeons are describing the data as shocking. Dr. Bob Gill says a decade of underfunding is to blame.
There's been real terms shrinkage in the wages of doctors and nurses, anything up to 15 to 20%. So the NHS is not retaining staff. We had Brexit, which led to a bit of an exodus of European staff within the NHS. And we've also had a massive reduction in NHS bed capacity. So without the staff, without the funding, and without the bed capacity, it's rational that the waiting lists are going to rise.
Well, Jo Goulding is a patient with rheumatoid arthritis and has been waiting for various surgeries since the summer of 2018. She says the delays are having a huge impact on her life.
This delay will have a long-lasting impact on me for the rest of my life because of the way that the joints now have deteriorated. It isn't just a case of a straightforward operation now, then there needs to be repairs. I don't expect special treatment. I don't want special treatment. I would just like to have fair access.
Russia is warning it will bolster its defences in the Baltic if Sweden and Finland join NATO. The two countries are on the verge of applying for membership. The deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, says if they do, the balance needs to be restored and there'll be no more talk of a nuclear-free region. Meanwhile, Russia has admitted its Black Sea flagship, the Moskva, was seriously damaged and its crew evacuated after an explosion on board the vessel. Russia's defence ministry claims a fire caused ammunition to blow up, but Ukrainian officials say it was hit by 2 anti-ship missiles. People going away for the Easter weekend are being warned to plan ahead. The Department for Transport says it's working to minimise disruption, but it's advising travellers to allow extra time for their journeys. It follows flight cancellations this week on top of queues for Channel ferry services. Motorists are being told to travel today or early on Saturday if they can. Prince William has hailed what he calls the game-changing nature of the Earthshot Prize. The Duke of Cambridge told actress Kate Blanchett on a Climate of Change podcast that he aims to focus on scaling up last year's competition winner. He added he'd like more women-led and more Indigenous community-led solutions to repairing the planet in this year's nominees. The Prince said he thinks huge strides can be made in tackling the planet's environmental crisis.
Everyone doing their bit and helping and supporting what we're trying to do is it's all of us in it together. In the same collective spirit, it would be great if we could tackle climate change and the environmental things the same way. I really do think it can be done in a much quicker time than we anticipate, because the solutions are out there. There is real solutions to these problems.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Patrick and Mercy and to the point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Muroki, and Patrick Christys on your TV, radio and online. It's just gone 10:05 and lots to talk about on today's agenda. Here's what's coming up.
Yeah, absolutely loads, actually. Home Secretary Priti Patel is finalising a deal to send some Channel migrants over 4,000 miles away to Rwanda for offshore processing of their applications. The Prime Minister is expected to announce the rest of his plan to tackle the migrant crisis. But what more can we expect him to say?
Yes, we'll be going to that a bit later on. Now, new figures show that more than 23,000 people in England have been waiting for NHS care for more than 2 years as the NHS strains under post-pandemic pressure. Former Health Secretary and NHS Confederation Chair Stephen Dorrell will join us to give his thoughts and tell us how we can solve this waiting list problem.
Yes, and finally, our reporter Rosie Wright joins us live from Euston Station to give us the latest travel updates for those lucky enough to have tomorrow or Good Friday off. Oh, you're off tomorrow?
Yeah. Hey, I'm off every Friday. It's not like it's a special treat. But anyway, we have all of that coming up and much more across the programme. You can get in touch with your views, as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. But first, Patrick's going to give his views on the new Rwandan migrant deal.
The fact is, our current asylum system is broken. I saw a letter from the Home Office this morning that was sent to all local authorities in England, Scotland and Wales. And the first line of it reads, the government is fixing the broken asylum system. So the very first line acknowledges that we're in an absolute mess. So by definition, something needs to change. A lot needs to change, actually. As we understand it, and we'll have to wait and see what's confirmed with this because we don't want to preempt anything, but there are plans in place to process male asylum seekers who arrive on their own into Britain at centres in Rwanda. This is clearly meant to be a deterrent, a barrier to those individuals travelling here in the first place. And I can see the logic behind that. There's a hotel near where I live that's been recommissioned by the Home Office and is now housing asylum seekers. I walked in there the other day because security was non-existent, and yes, there were a few women and children, but it was mostly single young men. I suspect that most people in this country would be more inclined to welcome in women and children than young single men, and perhaps this is what the Rwanda scheme is all about. But I worry that this is less of a workable scheme and more of a smokescreen, actually. Anyone who thinks the Rwanda option is a silver bullet is wrong. This morning I was sent a copy of a letter that went out to local authorities last night that The Home Office wants to move asylum seekers out of hotels and into private rented properties. So now local authorities, who are already struggling to accommodate their own homeless and the most vulnerable in their communities, will potentially now be competing with the Home Office for what little private rental stock there is. But check this out. The letter states that if the local authorities are unable to agree an approach to dispersal in their region, then the Home Office and its commercial partners will move ahead with a regional plan. This is bully boy tactics, isn't it? Apparently, all local authorities will receive a one-off payment of something like £250 per asylum seeker that they've accommodated as of March 27th this year. And the Home Office is also promising more funding to local authorities for additional bed space. That's according to what I've seen anyway. Will these people be able to find work, though? Will they require additional support from their local services, local GP surgeries, schools? If they fled genuine trauma, then it's reasonable to suspect that they might need mental health counselling, for example. I'm not for one second saying they should be denied these things, absolutely not at all. But I am curious as to know how local authorities will be able to afford it. The way I see it is this. Councils are going to be financially incentivised to give urgent accommodation to asylum seekers instead of the vulnerable people that they already have in their regions. Now, I'm not too sure how many people will be too happy about that. We await what Boris has to say about the Rwanda deal and indeed the finer points of what that means. But the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, it could just be a mere distraction. It appears to me, at least, that the real issue with our asylum seeker system remains very, very close to home. Yeah, it's balancing act. I just want to emphasise, really, I'm not for a single second saying that, you know, these people should not be accommodated anywhere and that they should be denied access. So there's not at all. It's just the practicalities of what that means, right, and how people are going to afford it.
Yeah, that's right. And it will be people having to pay for it, won't it? Because it will be the taxpayer who does have to ultimately foot the bill. It could mean rises, of course, in council tax, which are already cripplingly high for many people on low income. So there are those effects that need to be considered. And I really, when we talk about these issues with illegal crossings across the channel and asylum claims, I think, you know, whilst it's obviously a very important issue in and of itself, I don't think we talk enough about how it affects communities that are already in this country, how it affects local authorities, how it affects resources that people are already having to rely on, which are already stressed. These conversations are just as important, I think, because I think a country's primary responsibility is to the people who live here and its citizens and its residents. And I'm not sure, the balance is tricky here, balancing these needs of these different stakeholders, I guess.
I think it's a huge concern. And I don't think it's as simple as charity starts at home. That's a phrase that gets bandied out about there. And well, we don't live quite in a simplistic world as that these days, do we? However, there are reasonable questions to be asked about, well, you know, if someone's been on a housing waiting list for several years, maybe they've got mental health issues as well, maybe they've got other personal issues, and then, you know, where's the additional money to help them out? I'm concerned it might cause a problem in society, to be honest with you, as well. If it alters the balance. But anyway, we'll see. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and talking of services which are being crippled, new figures have been released showing that the true impact of the pandemic has had on the NHS waiting times in England. More than 6.1 million people are currently waiting for hospital care, which is about 1 in 9 England residents.
Well, in fact, PA Media reports that more than 23,000 English people have waited more than 2 years to be treated at a hospital, many of whom are in chronic pain, of course, awaiting things like hip replacements, knee replacements, gynecological surgery, for goodness sake, or orthopaedic corrections. Now, this month, many of us will see an increase to our national insurance payments, which is part of the government's attempt to tackle the backlog.
Yeah, but should they be able, or should they be doing more to help? Whether they're able to is another question. Well, joining us now is Stephen Dorrell, former chair of the NHS Confederation and former Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. Really appreciate your time this morning. I mean, first of all, these waiting list times are shocking. People should absolutely not have to be waiting that long in a first world country, one of the richest economies on the globe. It's a scandal.
Well, I completely agree that people shouldn't have to wait for treatment that their doctor, these aren't people waiting to see a doctor, these are people who've been told by the doctor they need treatment and they're having to wait for it. And that's something that the NHS has struggled with repeatedly through its history. It's not, we need to understand the background here clearly. That this has got significantly worse during the pandemic for all the reasons we know. But it's also true that waiting lists were rising before the pandemic. And it's equally true, actually, that the continuing effect of COVID is making it more difficult than it was before the pandemic started, more difficult for the health service to catch up and to bring these waiting lists back under control. So it's a little bit like your discussion of the what we do about asylum seekers, actually, recognising this is an immensely difficult problem, but it is an urgent one and does need to be addressed.
I don't take it that we're going to be outsourcing many patients to Rwanda, though, to be fair. But, no, I mean, how seriously, though, I mean, how do we actually deal with this? Because if people lose confidence, right, there was a fantastic column, actually, on Conservative Home the other day that went out, and it said this, especially a lot of young people, we get really angry if we have to wait 10 minutes for an Uber, right? Well, you know, if I had to wait a year or two for a hip replacement, for example, I think I'd just go private. And then people go, well, it's the government privatising the NHS. Isn't the NHS privatising the NHS with its incompetence?
Well, I don't accept the word incompetence, but I do accept that this is an issue that the health service, for all the reasons I've just touched on, has fallen behind and needs to demonstrate that it has the capacity to catch up. Now, part of that does rely, in my view, on recognising that this isn't just a matter for NHS service providers. The NHS has always been a public-private partnership. It was set up that way in 1948. And what the health service commissioners all around the country need to be doing is ensuring that they're accessing capacity, wherever that capacity is, whether it's in the public or the private sector, that's able to address these waiting lists. If you're a patient on a waiting list, you don't frankly care whether the service is going to be provided privately or publicly. What matters is that the NHS as a service committed to healthcare available on the basis of need, not ability to pay. It's about access. The health service needs to be able to secure that care for those who need it. And where that care is provided is a secondary question. Provided, of course, it's provided that the care comes at according to NHS standards and quality.
And the public is being asked to pay, well, most of the public is being asked to pay an extra 1.25% for healthcare and social care as well. This is to clear the backlog, yes, but you would also hope you would see improvements generally from before pre-pandemic levels. Do you think by the end of this Parliament, perhaps even by the end of the next, we will see genuine improvements from pre-pandemic levels, or will we just be fixing what lockdown and the pandemic did?
Well, I think there's two levels of answer to that. If you ask me, can we address these problems of access? And we've talked about waiting lists this morning, but we've had other conversations on other days about access to general practice, to primary care. We've had other conversations about waiting times in A&E departments and emergency access to hospitals as distinct from planned care off waiting lists. So the issue of access to care provided by the NHS, and incidentally provided also by the social care system, access. This is an issue right across the health and social care system. And the one thing that I think is important is that if we try to address waiting lists on their own, or GPs on their own, or social care on their own, we won't get there. And the answer to your question will be no. If, on the other hand, we address all the needs of this as a joined-up system and join it up in a way that we've never done before, then I think the answer to your question can be yes. But it's possible. Whether it will be done is a predictive exercise, and that depends on your views of the current evolution of policy and ministers.
Stephen, thank you very much. Stephen Dorrell there, of course, former chair of the NHS Confederation and former Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. Great to have you on the show. Right. After the break, we'll look into the finer details of this Rwandan migrant deal, and we'll also have the weather for you.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A bit misty and murky out there for many today, but it is going to brighten up and it's going to get a bit warmer as well, not just today, but actually as we head into the Easter weekend. Low pressure clearing away to the east, another one out west, but that's only making slow progress towards us. Generally, we're sitting under a little ridge of high pressure, which will bring most of us a fine dry day today. It is quite grey and murky out there first thing, a lot of mist and low cloud in the south. It'll take a while to clear. Thicker cloud too for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland. A little bit of rain here and there, certainly for the Western Isles, could be quite damp. But otherwise, it's generally dry. Skies will tend to brighten. Some good spells of sunshine over northeast England and brightening up across South Wales, southern England as well. Well, we could reach 20, maybe 21 Celsius. Generally, temperatures in the mid to high teens. Still a bit cooler across Western Scotland, where there will be that thicker cloud and a bit more rain just trickling in to the far west of Scotland, particularly the Highlands through this evening. Rain edging away from the north of Northern Ireland, so for many it becomes dry and clear. Again, turning a bit misty and murky, especially along the south coast, and temperatures dropping down into single figures. On to Good Friday, and for most it's a fine-looking day, dry and bright. There will still be some patchy rain across northern Scotland, maybe a few showers across Shetland, certainly early on. The threat of cloud increasing further west. We may just see one or two showers developing during the afternoon, but for many places it's a brighter day on Friday, better chance of seeing some lengthier spells of sunshine. And it will be feeling warmer once more. Temperatures more widely into the high teens, perhaps into the low 20s across the southeast. Some coasts will be cooler, particularly if it's misty and murky around the southwest or on the east coast of England with the breeze from the sea. Into the long weekend, many places will be dry, certainly for the first few days, and quite warm when the sun's out. We are going to see a change to cooler, more showery weather for Easter Monday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christys.
And I'm Mercy Muroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Right, yes, OK. Good morning, everyone. It's 10:22. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys and Mercy Muroki on GB News, live on your TV, radio and online this morning. Massive show, this.
Yes, now the biggest story of the day, perhaps, Home Secretary Priti Patel is in Rwanda to sign a 5-year agreement with the African country for them to process the asylum claims of our channel migrants. It's our government's latest attempt to tackle the spiralling migrant crisis, which saw over 28,000 asylum seekers arrive in the UK by boat last year.
Well, the Australian government has been sending asylum seekers to Nauru and Papua New Guinea since 2012 for offshore processing, to great international outrage over human rights concerns, apparently, but not necessarily domestically, I'm sure of that. Anyway, should we be doing the same?
That's why Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, joins us now to discuss this. This is obviously going to be seen as an incredibly controversial move, and many would say actually it might be quite a distraction tactic at the moment, given what else has been going on in Downing Street over the last week. Tell us what we can expect.
Well, we are expecting to hear from the Prime Minister later today, setting out the details, putting the flesh on the bone of this idea that has been knocking around the halls of power for quite some time. A couple of years ago, so it appeared in the newspapers that ministers were considering using Ascension Island, that British territory in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, as a migrant processing centre. That seems to have fallen by the wayside, but a deal that is being negotiated with the former Belgian colony of Rwanda now seems to be nearing its final stages, i.e. that people who made their way across the channel by very dangerous means, by that incredibly treacherous stretch of water, the busiest shipping lane in the world, the people who are single males who came across there, i.e. most likely to be potentially economic migrants rather than genuine asylum seekers, well, they will be flown to Rwanda for processing and indeed encouraged to stay there. We don't have all the details of the policy yet. We're expecting to hear that later today from the Prime Minister, and no doubt we'll bring that to viewers on GBNews as soon as it happens. But in terms of the general principle of this, there was some polling done back in 2020 on the Ascension Island idea rather than the Rwanda idea, but the principle is basically the same, offshore processing. And by a reasonable margin, the voters of the United Kingdom seem to be in favour.
Yes, I'm not surprised at that at all. Now, it's not just with that, though, is it? There's going to be apparently plans in place for all local councils to essentially have to take part in a dispersion deal, a new dispersion deal, which I know is going to be very tricky. This all comes down to resources, costs, accommodation, etc. Is this Rwanda deal expected to cost us less than what's happening now, or do we just not know yet?
We simply do not know the nuts and bolts of this yet. The Labour Party is criticising this policy, saying it's unworkable and, crucially, expensive. So once we see this set out, we'll be able to sort of look at this balance sheet. Obviously, it depends how many people come across. If there's a big deterrence effect, if fewer people come across because they will be at risk of being deported to Rwanda, in effect, or taken to Rwanda for processing, potentially fewer people come, and that might be cheaper that way. But it's very hard to gauge all the different moving parts as to what would be more expensive and what would less. Certainly the criticism of this policy, and it's a criticism that has been levelled in Australia as well, is that it is rather expensive.
It is expensive, I suppose, but I do wonder if over time the cost it will be worth it in a way, because we are spending increasing numbers on housing, on looking after people who go through our asylum system. Those numbers will increase. There's also the cost of life. Many people do actually die. So I do wonder whether it would be worth it in the long term. But the figures published earlier this year showed that 90% of the people crossing across the channel were male. That's a huge amount of people, isn't it? If we're talking about 90% of the numbers that came over last year, for example, that would be 20-something odd thousand just in a single year. I mean, how big is this processing centre going to be?
Well, that's another thing that is going to be worked out, of course, Priti Patel being in Rwanda today. We're going to hear many more details about exactly the spend, the size, the resources, who's going to be running it and how it's going to operates. The broad brushstrokes of this idea, however, are fairly clear, and the question is, will this have the sort of deterrence effect that many people want to see? Will people who currently are in northern France, or travelling across the European continent still want to come to the United Kingdom? Or, potentially, would they still be given misinformation by those criminal gangs that currently take thousands of euros from them in many cases and put them on these boats boats, overcrowded as they are, to go across this stretch of water? To what extent will these individuals, many of whom know very little about the situation of the legality of what they're doing, how many of these people on these boats will actually know that the policy has changed? And will that have a deterrence effect or not? It might take some time to find that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, this was just something that was sent to me earlier today, which is a letter from the Home Office that was sent to all local councils. And what it is basically a plan to move, in coordination, it would appear, with whatever's going on in Rwanda, right? A plan to get as many asylum seekers out of hotels at the taxpayers' expense as possible, and essentially into the communities. And the way they're doing this, sorry, I use my phone, it's just because I'm reading this now. The way they want to do this is basically to, bid for private rental stock as the Home Office that is already in the areas where local authorities have private rental stock, i.e. local authorities are now, who are already trying to house vulnerable people, homeless people, whatever, in private rental stock, are going to be competing with the Home Office now for this stock. I'm concerned about what could happen here. I'm concerned about the fact that actually, unless we start building loads more houses, then frankly, people who are already here, people who are already vulnerable, they could miss out.
That certainly seems to be a concern. I haven't seen this particular document that you're referencing, but of course there are many concerns about competing interests, and that's where a lot of the anxiety around migration or indeed asylum seeking comes, because the United Kingdom is generally a very open-hearted, warm and accepting country. People want to do right by the people who are having incredible hardship around the world, and the massive public support for the Homes for Ukraine scheme is probably the biggest recent example of that. Of course, however, that is mainly people who, of course, want to go back to Ukraine once this horrible situation is done with, and, of course, will be staying within the homes that are already existing, that already people are living in. To what extent could that sort of scheme be extended for other people who are seeking asylum? Potentially that's an option. But yes, it does seem to be, while we have a sort of fixed housing stock, while we are not building enough houses for the people that even live here to start with, that seems to be a big question. Now, some people would say we should be building a lot more houses, that particularly in some areas, particularly within cities where we don't have a particularly dense level of housing. I mean, if you go to continental Europe, you'd walk through any sort of major city and you'd be surprised to see any building that was fewer than 4 stories, whereas you walk through central London, lots of buildings are 2 stories. So we sort of are using the same space to have half as many houses in the UK as things stand in many situations. So potentially expanding the density of our cities could help with this issue. But yes, of course, there are competing interests for those limited resources.
Can I just ask, Tom, isn't there a chance that, because these people traffickers are very savvy, aren't they? They know they're running an operation that is very profitable. They're profiting off human misery as well. Isn't there the possibility that they'll just change tactic? Because I heard you speaking to Steve Valdez Simmons earlier from Amnesty International
UK,
and he was saying that actually asylum applications haven't gone up. They've just changed tactics, and they're not coming across on trucks anymore. They're actually just changing the method they're coming by. Isn't that the possibility that that would just happen again?
This is the concern. The situation right now, and for the last decade or so, has been a bit like whack-a-mole from the UK government. You sort out the situation in Calais, fewer people are now coming across, clinging underneath lorries or inside lorries or on trains or that sort of thing. And Calais seems to have been relatively, I mean, I'm not saying it's entirely sorted out, but certainly not the sort of jungle situation that we were seeing a decade ago. And what's happened? The people smugglers have moved a few dozen miles up the shoreline, away from Calais and closer to Dunkirk, and this is a wider stretch of water now, a more dangerous stretch of water, but one that is less patrolled and less policed, and that's where it's happening now. And yes, of course, the question would be, well, if that then gets shut down through another means, would another means be found, and will these people smugglers always be one step ahead of Whitehall and government officials, potentially?
Potentially, yes. Now, we are expecting the Prime Minister shortly, so be ready for that, everybody. But just back closer to home, so you're a political animal, right? You are a guru, some would say, of political fact. The current state of local council coffers, local authorities' coffers, what are they like? Because a lot of councils I know have worked very hard to balance the books, if they've indeed managed to, in recent years, and now suddenly could find themselves with very little consultation or to no consultation from the Home Office, dealing with an unknown amount of people who presumably will be pouring into their wider public services, not just housing. Is this affordable without any kind of real government help financially, do you think?
Well, I would assume that if it were to be a government-mandated system, there would be government money, I should say taxpayers' money, put into that as well. But you're right, many councils up and down the country are in dire financial straits. It was Croydon Council that recently declared bankruptcy. Many of these councils that since, potentially you could argue the rights or wrongs of this policy, many people would say this is a very good policy that came under the coalition government, whereby a local council can't raise council tax above a certain level without a local referendum. Now, that seems to be quite sensible, but it does mean ultimately if a council wants more money to do more things, and the demands on councils have grown for sure, well, if they need to get more money, then potentially they need to raise taxes, and no one wants to see that. Ultimately, to some extent, what people may want to be seeing is looking at where councils can save money, can cut costs, or indeed can help people out in that way. It is remarkable looking, and I know we're going to the local elections at the start of next month. You can compare the various tax rates around the country, and some councils are completely different from other ones. It seems that to some extent you can do more with less in some situations. But yes, you're absolutely right to say that across the country, many councils are really struggling.
They are. Well, look, I think you should stay right where you are, please, Tom, but we're just going to delve into the world of our inbox for the moment. GBViews, GBnews.uk. Good point, this from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. From a security point of view, she feels that our security is under threat. We don't know who necessarily a lot of these people are, where they come from, specifically with regards to, I think, the single males, I suppose, really, who are coming over the channel. And I think that's a justifiable point. Is it too basic of me to say, you know, you wouldn't let a total stranger into your house, and therefore, is there some analogy there with not knowing who these people are sometimes or where they come from?
I mean, yes, but the same could be said of, I suppose, any person who arrives in the country. But I think Jeff here makes a good point, which is the point I was making about the short-term versus long-term cost. He says the short-term cost will be far less. What's important is the deterrence effect. He says we have a lack of homes for the existing population, and that we need solutions instead of welcoming people in just out of sort of sympathy. We actually need solutions, especially because of those lack of homes.
Chris has raised an absolutely cracking point here. He says, in principle, it's a great idea or even deterrent to send asylum seekers to Rwanda for processing. However, a bit hypocritical given the current climate crisis. If we're flying people over there, consider the carbon footprint, says Chris. No, I suppose that's certainly a point, isn't it? It is an angle, but I was waiting for someone to say this, actually, especially the eco-warriors. You know, you think they'd pipe up, wouldn't they, and say, you know, you can't be doing this.
Well, somebody here, Paul here says, makes a good point, actually, because presumably this will be a contract with between the British government, the Home Office, and the provider of these detention, or rather processing centres. Processing, not detention. Paul says, better a poor African state be given millions than the treacherous French. Which, hey, look, there's a point in there, which is that would I rather...
It's normally me who says stuff like that. Is he after a show?
The vast majority...
the show. You can back off, Paul. I've got this.
The vast majority of people in Rwanda are in the most extreme poverty on a global scale. So look, if we put money into the economy rather than the French economy, maybe that could be an upside as well.
He's got a point. I think it's the use of the word treacherous that really hammered that point home there. But, yeah, no, definitely. I'm inclined to agree with you on that one, really. I'm concerned about at what point the generosity of the British public runs out, really. If we are seeing constantly that the cost of living is going up generally, energy bills, fuel, etc., 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 and then on top of that, we also end up with a situation where local authorities and therefore taxpayers having to pay more for this as well. At what point does that all start to run out? And then what happens then? We don't want to see civil unrest, do we? We don't want to see, you know, issues, race issues in the country or anything like that. And I would be concerned anyway that there will be at least the potential for pockets of that to open up if this isn't managed correctly.
Yeah, the other thing as well, and by the way, we are just waiting for the Prime Minister. He will be speaking imminently, and as soon as he gets up on the podium, we will go straight to him. But the other question for me...
Slinky? What is that? What is that? Ridiculous.
Yeah,
the best they could do.
Yeah, Patrick's referring to some kind of crisscrossed...
Yes, for those of us listening on radio, there's a very weird backdrop.
Yeah, anyway, point I was going to make was that what I wonder is if a family comes here and it's a family with a woman, a small child and a male, well, will the male be separated from the woman and child, for instance? I mean, these are details that matter because, to be honest, you don't want to be splitting up families. You'd rather have a family unit rather than the state suddenly having lots of single parents with their babies. That could actually be more costly than males. I mean, there's loads of options to explore, loads of things to consider here, which is why it's been so controversial so far. But as you said, there's no one answer.
No, exactly. Look, this is a very layered issue. No one's sitting here saying that there's all the answers and it's very easy to sort out. And if we just click our fingers and do this, and it'll be done. And it will take a multitude of different approaches to actually do it properly. Really, really about some of the potential for the societal impacts. Really, I've got to be honest with you as well. So tomorrow night, actually on Friday Night Feast, I am doing a bit of a special on asylum seeker hotels. And look, I don't want to give too much away or give anything away, really. But what I've got to be honest with you about, right, is that the way that the Home Office has handled the asylum seeker hotel situation, right, does not fill me with confidence that they will handle this well or indeed some kind of wider relocation scheme well. Tom, I'm just going to bring you back in, right? How do you think the Home Office has measured up when it comes to this? Because there is that, isn't there? If the general consensus is that they've not handled things particularly well so far, how can we expect them to get this right?
Well, it is a persistent point of criticism for the Home Office, because this is the Home Office which has been having a lot of issues, really, whether it's processing of visas. I mean, if we look at how the Homes for Ukraine scheme has gone down, peculiarly, this scheme is split across two departments. It was established by Michael Gove's department, the Levelling Up department, but implemented by the Home Office. And the speed at which visas have been issued has been criticised very widely. The competence of the bureaucracy, and it's a sprawling bureaucracy within the Home Office, is something that does come under a lot of criticism. And whether or not they will be able to implement a complicated scheme with many moving parts in different countries is a big question.
OK, well, as you can see now, thank you very much, Tom, by the way, political correspondent. The Prime Minister takes the podium right now in Kent. Let's hear what he has to say.
Absolutely beautiful day. For centuries, our United Kingdom has had a proud history of welcoming people from overseas, including many fleeing persecution. My own great-grandfather came from Turkey in fear of his life because our country offered sanctuary for his outspoken journalism. And when you look back over the centuries, as people have come seeking refuge or simply in search of somewhere to build a better life, you see that this is the very stuff our history is made of. From the French Huguenots to the Jewish refugees from Tsarist Russia, to the docking of the Empire Windrush, to the South Asians fleeing East Africa, to the many, many others who have come from different countries at different times for different reasons. All have wanted to be here because our United Kingdom is a beacon of openness and generosity. And all, in turn, have contributed magnificently to the amazing story of the UK. Today, that proud history of safe and legal migration is ultimately responsible for many of those working in our hospitals and on the front line of our response to the pandemic, for more than 60% of the England football team at the final of Euro 2020, for many of our country's leading figures in the worlds of business, art and culture. And I'm pleased to say for ever-growing numbers of people serving in public life, including colleagues of mine, like Nadim Zahawi, who escaped with his family from Saddam Hussein's Iraq, Dominic Raab, whose Jewish father came to Britain from Czechoslovakia to escape Nazi Germany, and Priti Patel, whose family fled persecution in Uganda. So I'm proud that this government has continued the great British tradition of providing sanctuary to those in need. In fact, doing more to resettle vulnerable people in the UK through safe and legal routes than any other government in recent history. Since 2015, we've offered a place to over 185,000 men, women and children seeking refuge, more than the entire population of Sunderland. and more than any other similar resettlement schemes in Europe. This includes almost 100,000 British nationals overseas threatened by draconian security laws in Hong Kong, 20,000 through our Syrian scheme, 13,000 from Afghanistan and to whom we owe debts of honour, and around 50,000 Ukrainians. And we're not only supporting British nationals and those settled in the UK to bring potentially hundreds of thousands to their extended family from Ukraine, we're also welcoming unlimited numbers of refugees from that conflict as the British people open their homes in one of the biggest movements of refugees to this country that we've ever known. And as we work with local authorities and the devolved administrations to welcome those coming from Ukraine into our communities, we will also find accommodation across our whole UK for all those who have come here previously but who are currently in hotels. Because it makes absolutely no sense for the taxpayer to foot those bills running to almost £5 million a day, with the sum total of those we accommodate being concentrated in just a third of local authorities. It is controlled immigration through safe and legal routes which enables us to make generous offers of sanctuary while managing the inevitable pressures on our public services, such that we can give all those who come here the support they need to rebuild their lives, to integrate and to thrive. But the quid pro quo for this generosity is that we cannot sustain a parallel illegal system. Our compassion may be infinite, but our capacity to help people is not. We can't ask the British taxpayer to write a blank cheque to cover the costs of anyone who might want to come and live here. Uncontrolled immigration creates unmanageable demands on our NHS and on our welfare state. It overstretches our local schools, our housing and public transport, and creates unsustainable pressure to build on precious green spaces. Nor is it fair on those who are seeking to come here legally if others can bypass the system. It's a striking fact that around 7 out of 10 of those arriving in small boats last year were men under 40, paying people smugglers to queue jump and taking up our capacity to help genuine women and child refugees. This is particularly perverse as those attempting crossings are not directly fleeing imminent peril, as is the intended purpose of the asylum system. They've passed through manifestly safe countries, including many in Europe, where they could and should have claimed asylum. It is this rank unfairness of a system that can be exploited by gangs which risks eroding public support for the whole concept of asylum. The British people voted several times to control our borders, not to close them, but to control them. So just as Brexit allowed us to take back control of legal immigration by replacing free movement with our points-based system, we're also taking back control of illegal immigration with a long-term plan for asylum in this country. It is a plan that will ensure the UK has a world-leading asylum offer, providing generous protection to those directly fleeing the worst of humanity by settling thousands of people every year through safe and legal routes. And I emphasize this. So whether you're fleeing Putin or Assad, our aim is that you should not need to turn to the people smugglers or any other kind of illegal option. But to deliver that, we must first ensure that the only route to asylum in the UK is a safe and legal one, and that those who try to jump the queue or abuse our system will find no automatic path to settlement in our country, but rather be swiftly and humanely removed to a safe third country or their country of origin. And the most tragic of all forms of illegal migration, which we must end with this approach, is the barbaric trade in human misery conducted by the people smugglers in the Channel. Before Christmas, 27 people drowned, and in the weeks ahead, there could be many more losing their lives at sea and whose bodies may never be recovered. Around 600 came across the Channel yesterday. In just a few weeks, this could again reach 1,000 a day. I accept that these people, whether they're 600 or 1,000, are in search of a better life, the opportunities that the United Kingdom provides, and the hope of a fresh start. But it is these hopes, those dreams, that have been exploited. These vile people smugglers are abusing the vulnerable and turning the Channel into a watery graveyard, with men, women and children drowning in unseaworthy boats and suffocating in refrigerated lorries. And even if they do make it here, we know only too well some of the horrendous stories of exploitation over the years, from the nail bars of East London to the cocklebeds of Morecambe Bay, as illegal migration makes people more vulnerable to the brutal abuse of ruthless gangs. So, we must halt this appalling trade and defeat the people smugglers. That's why we're passing the Nationality and Borders Bill, which allows us for the first time to distinguish between people coming here legally and illegally. And for this distinction to affect how your asylum claim progresses and your status in the UK if that claim is successful. It will enable us to issue visa penalties against those countries that refuse to accept returns of foreign criminals and failed asylum seekers. It will clean up the abuse of our legal system, introducing a one-stop shop that will end the cycle of last-minute and vexatious claims and appeals that so often thwart and delay removals. And it will end the absurd practice of asylum-seeking adults claiming to be children to strengthen their claims and access better services. Crucially, it will also allow us to prosecute those who arrive illegally with life sentences for anyone piloting the boats, and to identify, intercept and investigate these boats. From today, the Royal Navy will take over operational command from Border Force in the Channel, taking primacy for our operational response at sea, in line with many of our international partners, with the aim that no boat makes it to the UK undetected. This will be supported by £50 million of new funding for new boats, aerial surveillance and military personnel, in addition to the existing task force of patrol vessels, Wildcat helicopters, search and rescue aircraft, drones and remotely piloted aircraft. This will send a clear message to those piloting the boats. If you risk other people's lives in the Channel, you risk spending your own life in prison. People who do make it to the UK will be taken not to hotels at vast public expense, rather they will be housed in accommodation centres like those in Greece, with the first of these to open shortly. At the same time, we are expanding our immigration detention facilities to assist with the removal of those with no right to remain in the UK. We're investing over £500 million in those efforts, and this is on top of overhauling our arrivals infrastructure here in Kent, with new processing facilities now operational at Western Jetfoil and at Manston. But we will need to go further in breaking the business model of these gangs. So from today, our new migration and economic development partnership will mean that anyone entering the UK illegally, as well as those who have arrived illegally since January the 1st, may now be relocated to Rwanda. This innovative approach, driven by our shared humanitarian impulse and made possible by Brexit freedoms, will provide safe and legal routes for asylum while disrupting the business model of the gangs. because it means that economic migrants taking advantage of the asylum system will not get to stay in the UK, while those in genuine need will be properly protected, including with access to legal services on arrival in Rwanda, and given the opportunity to build a new life in that dynamic country, supported by the funding we are providing. The deal we've done is uncapped, and Rwanda will have the capacity to resettle tens of thousands of people in the years ahead. And let's be clear, Rwanda is one of the safest countries in the world, globally recognized for its record on welcoming and integrating migrants. Later this year, it will welcome leaders from across the Commonwealth. And before the pandemic, in 2018, the IMF said Rwanda was the world's fourth fastest growing economy. We're confident that our new migration partnership is fully compliant with our international legal obligations. But nevertheless, we expect this will be challenged in the courts. And if this country is seen as a soft touch for illegal migration by some of our partners, it is precisely because we have such a formidable army of politically motivated lawyers who for years have made it their business to thwart removals and frustrate the government. So I know that this system will not take effect overnight, but I promise that we will do whatever it takes to deliver this new approach. Initially within the limits of the existing legal and constitutional frameworks, but also prepared to explore any and all further legal reforms which may be necessary. Because this problem has bedeviled our country for too long and caused far too much human suffering and tragedy. And this is the government that refuses to duck the difficult decisions. This is the government that makes the big calls, and I profoundly believe there is simply no other option. And I say to those who would criticize our plan today, well, we have a plan. What is your alternative? Now, I know there are some who believe we should just turn these boats back at sea. But after much study and consultation, including with Border Force, the police, National Crime Agency, and military maritime experts, to whom, by the way, I pay tribute for all the incredible work that they do dealing with this problem as things stand, it's clear that there are extremely limited circumstances when you can safely do this in the English Channel. And it doesn't help that this approach, I don't think, would be supported by our French partners. And I've got to say to you that relying solely on this course of action is simply not practical in my view. And I know, of course, that there are others who would say we should just negotiate a deal with France and the EU. And we've made repeated and generous offers to our French friends, and we will continue to press them and the EU for the comprehensive returns agreement that would solve this problem. We remain grateful to the gendarmes on the beach for the joint intelligence work and the cooperation that has stopped thousands of boats. We would like to deepen that work, and we continue to believe that a deal with France and the EU is in the national interests of all our countries. But we must have our own framework for full sovereignty over our borders, and we must find a way to stop these boats now, not lose thousands more lives while waiting for a deal that just doesn't exist. And I know that there will be a vocal minority who will think that these measures are draconian and lacking in compassion. And I simply don't agree. There is no humanity or compassion in allowing desperate and innocent people to have their dreams of a better life exploited by ruthless gangs as they're taken to their deaths in unseaworthy boats. And there's no humanity or compassion in endlessly condemning the people smugglers, but then time and again ducking the big calls needed to break the business model of the gangs and stop these boats from coming. And there's no humanity or compassion in calling for unlimited, safe and legal routes, offering the false hope of asylum in the UK to anyone who wants it, because that is just unsustainable. There are currently 80 million displaced people in the world, many in failed states where governments can't meet their aspirations. In an era of mobile connectivity, they are a call or a text away from potentially being swept up in the tide of people smuggling. The answer cannot be for the UK to become the haven for all of them. That's a call for open borders by the back door, a political argument masquerading as a humanitarian policy. And those in favour of this approach should be honest about it and argue for it openly. We reject it, as the British people have consistently rejected it at the ballot box, in favour of controlled immigration. We simply cannot have a policy of saying anyone who wants to live here can do so. We've got to be able to control who comes into this country and the terms on which they remain. And we must do this in the spirit of our history of providing refuge. And in that way, we can more than play our part in offering sanctuary to thousands fleeing persecution. But then, of course, other countries must play their part too. And that's what I think is most exciting about the partnership we've agreed with Rwanda today, because we believe it will become a new international standard in addressing the challenges of global migration and people smuggling. So I'm grateful for Rwanda's leadership and partnership, and we stand ready to work with other nations on similar agreements, as well as wider reforms to the international asylum framework. As I say, we will continue to work with our French friends to tackle the gangs. We will continue to lead cooperation with crime and intelligence partners across Europe. We will continue to seek a returns agreement with the EU or with France. But in the meantime, and for the foreseeable future, we need this new approach. The people smugglers are undermining confidence in our borders. They are betraying all those who do the right thing, who try to come here legally through forms of migration or the safe and legal routes provided for refuge. They are undermining the natural compassion and goodwill that people have towards refugees in this country, and they are endangering human life day after day. And though the way ahead will be hard, and though we can expect many challenges and many obstacles to be thrown up against this plan, I believe this plan is the right way forward, because the people smugglers must be stopped in order to save countless lives, and because tackling illegal migration is precisely the way to sustain a safe, legal and generous offer of sanctuary to those in need. And that is in the very best traditions of this country and the values we stand for in the world. Thank you all very much indeed. I'm now going to go to the media for some questions. I'm going to go first to Nick Eardley of the BBC.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Is the plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda a genuine answer? Is it a workable solution? Or is it an attempt to look tough on an issue which the government's failed to address in the last few years? And if I can ask about the fine you received earlier this week, do you still think you have the moral authority to govern? What would you say to the people watching at home who think that you have been guilty of hypocrisy for not following the rules you told them they must follow? And what would you say to the MPs who think you lied to them?
Well, thanks very much, Nick. And look, on your second point, I said quite a lot about this on, I think it was Tuesday. I'll be saying more when I update Parliament, as you can imagine, next week. And I think you probably have to wait until then for me to say more on that. But on whether this is a solution that is a magic bullet, as it were, that can deal with the problem of illegal migration across the Channel, I want to be absolutely clear with everybody. I think that this is necessary, but it is, of course, not sufficient. There are many other things that we need to get right. We need to make sure that our legal framework is capable of dealing with the problem, as well as the practical steps that we can take. But none of the reforms to our laws will really be any good without the basic ability to get in the heads of the people smugglers and make them understand that the deal they're offering their poor, vulnerable clients is not one that stacks up. And it's to get into the heads of the people who are coming across the channel, risking their lives in this way, that they're much, much better off going for the safe and legal routes that we have, rather than paying to jump the queue and to risk their lives. Because if they go that way, if they come across the channel illegally in these vessels, then they risk, as I've explained, ending up not in the UK but in Rwanda. And that is something that I believe will, over time, prove a very considerable deterrent. But there are several things that you've got to get right in addition to that policy, not least the legal framework. Because I've got no doubt at all that this will be challenged, and there will be a long way to go. But it's an indispensable component of the solution. Anushka Astana, ITV.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the people you're talking about say they are fleeing persecution, and they often come from countries where there are no safe routes here in the UK. Why are you sending them with one-way tickets to a country where there are reports of ill treatment and torture in detention centres, and that your own government criticised last year for failing to investigate these alleged human rights violations? And a quick question, because I'm not patient enough to wait, so I hope you will answer it. But on Tuesday, you've admitted that you unknowingly misled Parliament. I just want to understand if you're going to put the record straight.
Yeah. Thanks. So on the second point, again, Anushka, forgive me, you're going to have to wait until I come to Parliament. Of course, I will set the record straight in any way that I can. But on your point about safe and legal routes, I just think it's crucial for people to understand that the UK is very, very generous, and we should be proud as a country of what we do to welcome people. 185,000 just in the last few years. And it's not just the people who came under op pitting from Afghanistan. We're opening our arms to more. What we're doing with the Ukrainian scheme is two uncapped systems of looking after people coming from Ukraine. This is a country that is built on successful immigration by safe and legal routes. But what we're trying to do is to buttress that, to shore it up in people's imaginations, to make sure that people believe in it and trust our immigration system by cracking down on the illegal approach and on the people smuggling. And I just want to say something about Rwanda, because I think there's a risk of stereotyping here. And Rwanda is totally transformed over the last few decades. It's a very, very different country from what it was. And we are making sure that we have a very, very high degree of confidence about the way people will be received in Rwanda. We're today publishing a long memorandum of understanding between the UK and Rwanda about how they will be received and treated. And this is not something that we have put together overnight. This has been 9 months in preparation. So I would just urge people, not to think in a blinkered way about Rwanda. There will be. I think that this is the prototype of a solution to the problems of global migration flows that is likely to be adopted by other countries. I know that there are other European countries that are already in similar discussions, not just with Rwanda, but others. Billions of people are going to be moving across the face of the planet. We need sensible partnerships to address those flows. Theo Usherwood of LBC.
Prime Minister, last year more than 28,000 migrants crossed the Channel. Is your aim to bring that number down, and what will you do if this policy fails to do that? And just on Partygate, you told the Commons on December the 8th that it goes without saying that if the rules were broken, and then there will be disciplinary action for all those involved. When you go to Parliament next week and you speak to MPs and you're in the House of Commons, will you detail what that disciplinary action is that you've imposed on those who work for you and indeed yourself?
Thanks, Theo. I can certainly tell you that I will be updating, as I said to Anushka and to Nick, I'll be updating Parliament on all that next week. But on your first point about the numbers, look, you're right. The numbers were high last year, but this year they're going to be even higher. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they're already just in the first few months of this year. They're higher than they were over the comparable period last year. They're growing. This is the people smugglers are now becoming very adept. They're getting their boats, these frail things that you'll have seen. They're getting them in huge numbers. It looks as though they're being manufactured to order in China. They have a whole system going now, and we need in a humane and compassionate way to interrupt their business model. They're making, I think Dan told me, what, 350,000 euros a boat, something like that. This is a lucrative trade for them. It is an evil trade, and it's undermining people's confidence in safe and legal migration. We need to emphasise the safe and legal routes and undermine what the people smugglers are doing. And I just want to be absolutely frank with people, Theo. This is not something, or this is, I think, the deal that we're doing with Rwanda is an essential part of the solution, but it is not the total solution. It is a part of it is one of several steps that we're taking to beat the problem. John Stevens, Daily Mail.
Hi, thank you, Prime Minister. Can I just clarify, is it your aim to bring the numbers crossing the channel illegally eventually down to zero? And on your relationship with Rishi Sunak, is he in danger of being moved as Chancellor, or can you say today that he's got that job for as long as he wants it?
Yeah, sorry. So yes to the second, and yes to, I think, to the first. Obviously, we do want to make sure that I'd like to get it down to zero. I think everybody in this room would like to get it down to zero. I think people in this room do an absolutely heroic job, and it's incredibly difficult to get the balance right and to be firm, but also to be humane and compassionate to people, very, very vulnerable people who are, who doing something that is extremely brave and extremely dangerous, and which they shouldn't be doing. What we want to show people is that this is not only dangerous, but also likely to end in failure for you, that you're taking the wrong step, that there is a better solution, and you should wait and go via the safe and legal route and not fall victim to the people smugglers. That's what we're trying to do. Aubrey Allegretti from The Guardian.
Thank you, Prime Minister. On top of the concerns about the human rights record of Rwanda, where people who will be fleeing to the UK might obviously be sent because they're facing persecution at home, there's also a cost element. One estimate puts it at £2 million per person per year, and a Conservative MP, Andrew Mitchell, has suggested it would be cheaper to put people up at the Ritz instead. So are you comfortable with the cost element of the plan? And on the party situation you faced, why do we have to wait another week? Can you tell us whether or not you're going to rule out resigning, whether you faced 1, 2, 3 or more fines? Thank you.
Okay, so Aubrey, second question, I redirect you to what I said earlier on. I'm afraid that that won't give you any particular surprise. I said quite a lot about this on earlier in the week. I think I should wait till Parliament gets back to update Parliament fully. And on your point about cost, look, what's happening already? The asylum system is already costing this country £1.5 billion a year. The hotel costs are now £5 million a day. You talk about the Ritz. They're now £5 million a day, and it's climbing. And unless we can beat the business model of the gangs, I'm afraid it will continue to climb. And what we need to put in place is the deterrent system that will change their minds, make them see that they've made the wrong deal and that there's a better path for them if they really want to come to the UK. And that's what we're doing today. Last question to Jonathan Riley of The Sun.
Prime Minister, can you guarantee to the British people that under your premiership there will be no more small boats? And secondly, the Home Secretary is in Kigali today. Would she not be better off being in Paris, speaking to the French officials there and prioritising a bilateral deal with France to stop this? And are you confident that post-French elections that deal will be struck? Thank you.
Look, I think that's really, Jonathan. I think that is the most important issue that you've touched on, and I think it's the issue that's uppermost in everybody's minds because who studied this problem. And so, can I guarantee that we're going to get rid of the small boats problem? No, obviously not. I think that what we can hope to do is to demolish the business model and greatly to deter those who come here. But to say that we're going to get down to zero anytime soon is unlikely. And what we're proposing today is, I think, certainly a radical plan, but it will take a while to come fully and properly into effect. But I just want to say on France and on Paris, and many other ministers have been continually in Paris over the last couple of years trying to negotiate a returns agreement, trying to sort this problem out. And it has been disappointing and frustrating that we've been unable to do that. The French say it needs to be done at an EU level. That hasn't been negotiable either. In my view and the view of many people who studied this, there is more that could be done to intercept people at the French side. There is more that could be done on the beaches in France and now in Belgium as well. But we're not here to try to find fault with anybody else today. Today is about the UK coming up with its own solution in the absence of a proper agreement with France, and that's what we're doing, and we'll continue to work with. A lot of the cooperation with the French is excellent, and we just think it could go further, and there's more to do. I think that'd be probably a fair summary of it. But in the meantime, before we get that, what we need to do is have a more radical solution that enables us, as the UK, to offer our own package and to undermine the business case of the people traffickers, and that's what we're doing. That's the purpose of this whole package: the military primacy, the new reception centres, and the new migration and economic partnership deal with Rwanda. That's what we're trying to do. I'm not going to pretend it will work overnight, but I do believe that in time, this is the best way forward. It's the morally right thing to do. It's the humane and the compassionate thing to do as well, because we cannot have people continuing to die at sea, paying huge sums to evil people traffickers who are simply exploiting their hopes and their ambitions. We need to encourage them to take the safe and legal route if they want to come to this country. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, that was the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, unveiling the new plan for asylum, new plan for immigration, new plan for illegal migration as well. Massive announcement there. I mean, this is the sort of thing people were expecting of a Conservative government when they voted them in. So I think there's a lot of Tories, grassroots, that will be very happy with the announcements that Boris Johnson there made.
Yeah, let's hit you with the highlights. He says that we cannot sustain a parallel illegal system as well as the current legal immigration system that we have at the moment, certainly in light of what's going on in Ukraine. The Navy will take over the patrolling of the Channel as of today. He confirmed that he wants the number of boats across the Channel down to zero. And also, as we're going to go on to discuss a little bit later on, quite clever politically, potentially, as opponents of this particular scheme now risk engaging in rather lazy tropes about Rwanda and indeed that part of the world. So actually quite a clever scheme in the round, potentially.
Yes, let's quickly cross over to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who joins us right beside the table. What were your takeaways from this, your big takeaways?
Well, I think there were some pretty large admissions there from the Prime Minister that this is a very difficult political issue. What was really striking to me was that the Prime Minister there admitted that the numbers crossing the Channel illegally have been growing and are likely to be even higher by the end of this year than they were last year. His argument is that unless something radical is done now, and of course this sort of stuff takes time to set up, you can't snap your fingers and make a change in this instance, unless something radical is done now to change how we handle this system, the numbers will continue to grow and grow and grow. And that's quite a salient political message. Can he deliver on what he's saying, though? That remains to be a big question.
Yeah, so as we understand it anyway, and there was a lot to take in there, of course, but as we understand it, anyone arriving illegally could be sent to Rwanda.
That certainly seemed to be the implication, although what we have heard is that this is about single men arriving, which is the overwhelming majority of those who have been arriving in the UK by small boat as well. Ultimately, this was about creating the sense that this is not a path, not a legitimate path by which someone may come to the country.
All right, OK, well, look, we've still got loads to come for you. We're going to be picking this apart, I imagine, for most of the show. Get those views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But first, ladies and gents, the weather.
Hello. Things are warming up for the start of the long weekend. Certainly today, it's getting a little warmer out there, dry and bright for the most part. And for Good Friday, it's also looking warmer still. High pressure is in control. It's not quite sitting right over us and keeping the weather fronts completely at bay. At times, these weather fronts are going to try and push in from the west, and certainly one today is bringing more cloud and a bit of patchy rain over the Western Isles, maybe on the west coast of the mainland of Scotland, and also maybe the far north of Northern Ireland, seeing a few spots of drizzly rain. But for the vast majority, it is dry. Quite a lot of cloud this morning, but it is melting away through the afternoon, and many places seeing some sunny spells. A few coasts in the west may stay a little misty and murky, and that'll suppress the temperatures. But in the sunny spells, high teens, low 20s possible across the southeast, so really quite warm. A little bit more of that showery rain drifting northwards across northern Scotland through the evening, but for the most, it'll be a dry night and a clear night. Cloud will start to increase once more across South Wales, southwest England, perhaps a little bit of mist and low cloud here and there first thing on Good Friday as temperatures drop down into high single figures, so not particularly chilly. And for most, Good Friday is looking like a dry and a bright day, probably more sunshine than today, certainly over the Midlands, northern England and northwest Scotland. Some patchy cloud further west, and we will see a lot of cloud for Northern Ireland, some showers breaking out here. One or two showers possible North Wales, and later on Northern England and southern Scotland could see a heavy shower, but they'll be pretty isolated. Most places dry and temperatures 22, maybe 23 Celsius across the southeast. A little cooler on some of these eastern coasts and with a bit more cloud further west. Still one or two of those showers moving in during Friday evening across southern and then central Scotland. A possibility of a heavier shower here for a time. One or two showers possible on Saturday, but most places again dry and bright. Some rain in Northern Ireland on Sunday and turning cooler with a bit more rain around by Monday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christys.
And I'm Mercy Muroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us. 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Well, good morning. It's 11:23 and you're watching To The Point, here with me, Mercy Muroki, and Patrick Christys on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Exactly right. Well, OK, look, we have just seen now, haven't we, Boris Johnson give a landmark statement, really, a statement of global significance, international significance, about Britain's plan going forward regarding illegal immigration and asylum seekers. I'm just going to delve into the inbox quickly, just to give you a flavour of what some of you have been saying at home. GBViews at gbnews.uk, of course. Well done, Boris. About time we made a start in this war against illegal immigration. That's from David. Brilliant idea, sending them to Rwanda.
Well, John says he doesn't believe that they have the guts, he says, to enforce this. So there will be a lot of people, I think, in that position who have said, yes, you know, this is, in principle, on paper, a good idea. This is the kind of thing I voted for when I voted for a Conservative government. And we'll be saying, but will you actually go ahead and do it? That would be the big question.
Yeah. And just one quickly before we move on is from Lou, and this is a point I've just made on Twitter, actually, and it's a really important announcement by Boris Johnson regarding illegal immigration. Then what are all the questions about Partygate? And this is a point I'll make. It's all very well and good, the kind of snivelling chatterati in the MSM who think that actually the most important thing is a gotcha cake moment. You know what the vast majority of the British public care about? Stopping illegal immigration. And there's a massive difference there. Anyway, moving on. New figures have been released showing the true impact that the pandemic has had on NHS waiting times in England, with more than 6.1 million people currently waiting for hospital care, which is about 1 in 9 of England's residents.
Yes, on top of that, more than 23,000 people in England have been waiting for NHS care for more than 2 years. That's according to new figures obtained by the PA News Agency. A record 6 million people are currently on the waiting list for NHS hospital care. Many are in pain as they wait for treatment, which includes for things like hip replacements, orthopaedic surgery, even gynecological surgery. So some really important things they're missing there.
Yeah, well, our London reporter Alice Porter joins us live from Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey. Thank you very much. Alice, tell us more about what's going on with these waiting times, please.
Well, this data comes from 69 hospital trusts who responded to a Freedom of Information request. And what it reveals is that there are 93 patients throughout the country that have been waiting for at least 3 years for treatment. And what's worse is there are 9 patients who've been waiting for more than 4 years. Now, look, we know waiting lists were a big problem before the pandemic. There are about 4.5 million people who are on waiting lists before the pandemic. But of course, those numbers have now increased dramatically because so many operations and procedures were not able to take place over the last couple of years, and that has caused a significant backlog.
Indeed, and a lot of people are, of course, in immense pain as well, aren't they? I mean, the impact on patients is massive for this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of leading surgeons have seen today's figures and have said they're absolutely shocked. And so there are a lot of patients who will be in severe distress. I mean, my father is actually a consultant who came out of retirement to help with the backlog. And he's been coming to London every weekend trying to help with restoring with the issue of the backlog. And he said to me a number of times he's concerned about the mental health of patients who've been waiting for such a long amount of time, who are in severe pain. Because if we look, about of the quarter of the people who've been waiting the longest, they've been waiting for trauma and orthopaedic care. So that could be a hip replacement or a knee replacement. Perhaps if someone's got arthritis. So I think that gives an indication there of the immense pain you'd be in on a day-to-day basis. Now, Jo Goulding is one of those people. She's been waiting for almost 4 years for treatment because of her rheumatoid arthritis. And this is how she says it's been impacting her life.
When I say it's all-encompassing, it literally is. Every aspect of your life it affects. Work, I've had to become a home worker permanently at the moment, because there's just no way that I could manage to be in an office at the moment. My recovery is going to be a long one from this operation, because I had to wait so long, and because the operation had to be more or became more complex because of the length of time I waited. There is nothing that it hasn't touched. Nothing. Friendships, being able to socialise with friends. I can't remember the last time I went out with friends.
So that's Jo Goulding there, who's been waiting for almost 4 years for her treatment there. And you can see the impact that's been having on her life. Now, of course, NHS leaders saying they're doing all they can to tackle the backlog, but it's still a problem with staff absences because of people having absences with COVID. I mean, if you work in the NHS, you still have to isolate for 5 days. And so that's causing a big problem.
OK, Alice, thank you very, very much. As always, great to have you on the show. Thank you for bringing us that report, our London reporter, Alice Porter. Look, we've got an issue as well. We are going to return, don't worry, shortly to the announcement that Boris Johnson made there about asylum seekers and illegal immigration. But just before that, London cabbies have launched Black Cabs Matter. That's right, it's a campaign against rising fuel prices, driving charges, as well as a lack of help for older drivers forced off the road post-pandemic.
Yes, instead of a one-minute silence, the campaign kicked off in south-west London with a 1-minute deafening drone of black cabs tooting. Very clever.
Yeah, you see, this stuff doesn't just happen, you know.
Classically English thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. Well, joining us now in the studio is Howard Cox, one of the campaign's organisers and founder of Fair Fuel UK. Howard, thank you very much for joining us in the studio. You picked a busy day for it, to be fair, in the news agenda, but yes, so go on, what's the issue? What are the main issues for you?
Well, it's actually been set up by Car 26, Lois Perry. I think you know she's been on your shows before. And fundamentally, we're worried about the black cabs. They're declining. They're up against local traffic networks, congestion charge, a completely and utterly ego-driven mayor, I'm afraid, I'm sorry to say. Who in their right mind would want to become a cab driver now and learn the wonderful knowledge? I think last year there was only 220 applications to actually do the knowledge. It's really dropped incredibly. And it's ridiculous. The cost of fuel, which is the one which I'm the one that, in terms of Fair Fuel UK, we are actually fighting on behalf of the cost of fuel. And we're reaching Easter coming up to Easter, and we're seeing two double whammies. We're seeing protests in terms of oil depots impacting and drying up a lot of pumps across mainly below the Midlands. And secondly, we're not seeing the 5p cut in fuel duty being passed on to drivers either. Pump prices are rocketing. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and what about business in terms of customers? I mean, has the industry seen a huge number of customers now go to private providers like Uber and others? Or actually has that remained relatively stable? Because that's a key part of it, isn't it?
I don't know the full breakdown of that, to be fair, Mercy. What I do understand is they're suffering. Black cab drivers, and that's why we say black cab drivers matter. It's important to understand they are the commercial heartbeat of the economy in London. They take everyone. They take tourists. They're very honest. They're incredibly well balanced. They can't control their prices. That's controlled by the transport authorities in Central Hall from Sadiq Khan. They have no choice but to just sit there and take it. And I'm afraid London is a difficult place to drive around now.
Yeah, but I think they've got a real chance. I have pretty much, not entirely, pretty much stopped using Uber. The prices have gone up massively, I don't always get a reliable service, especially sometimes the odd morning I might try and get an Uber in here. You know, I've got to be in at a certain time, and you know the amount of times I get there and I'm relying on them. Cancelled. You got it. Then you wait another 5 minutes. Cancelled. Before you know it, you've waited half an hour, 35 minutes. I could probably have walked in pretty much in that particular period of time. And they're unreliable. A black cab is solid, reliable, traditional, good stuff.
And you feel safe. I know my wife, when she travels in London, etc., she will never get into an Uber. She'll always only get into a black cab. And they are truly honest. You will not be going around all the houses to actually all those sorts of things. So I really would like, implore your people watching this to actually support black cabs in London.
And how can people at home or the government support black cab drivers? What are you actually calling for?
Well, we're going to be doing several protests right across the country. It wasn't as successful as we'd like it to be today, partly because of actually, would you believe, congestion, cabs getting there.
Classic.
It is classic, Patrick, you're absolutely right. But no, we want, please sign up on the website, Black Cabs Matter, and join with us. And please also join Fairfield UK. That's the one close to my heart.
Absolutely. Look, thank you very, very much. Great to have you in the studio. Appreciate you making the effort to come in. Sorry it's a bit short and sweet, but it's been a bit mad, really, with everything that's been going on. But thank you very much. And,
someone will get you a cab.
Someone will get you a cab. It's probably, I just imagine you've got a few on speed dial there, Howard. But,
Terrible joke.
But Cox, so thank you, Fuel UK. Now, after the break, we're going to be discussing loads more in quite a lot of detail, actually, about what Boris Johnson has been announcing with the asylum seekers, with Rwanda and with illegal immigration. There's loads to get stuck into there, OK? Also news that the Navy is going to be patrolling the channel and that he wants the number of boats crossing that channel to get down to 0. There's been some backlash, but we'll get stuck into all sides of it after this morning's news.
Good morning, it's 11:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Royal Navy is taking over command from Border Force in the Channel under new government plans to tackle illegal immigration. The Prime Minister has also confirmed asylum seekers will be flown to Rwanda for processing as part of a £120 million deal. Boris Johnson says he'll have the capacity to resettle tens of thousands of people over the coming years, and the scheme will serve as a considerable deterrent.
These vile people smugglers are abusing the vulnerable and turning the channel into a watery graveyard. To identify, intercept and investigate these boats, from today, the Royal Navy will take over operational command from Border Force in the Channel, taking primacy for our operational response at sea, in line with many of our international partners, with the aim that no boat makes it to the UK undetected.
Dozens of NHS patients have waited more than 3 years for hospital care in England because of the growing backlog. Figures show more than 6 million people are currently on waiting lists, with 23,000 waiting over 2 years to start routine treatment. Top surgeons are describing the data as shocking. Russia is warning it will increase its military presence in the Baltic if Sweden and Finland join NATO. The two countries are on the verge of applying for membership. The deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, says if they do, the balance needs to be restored and there'll be no more talk of a nuclear-free region. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere though. Patrick and Mercy will be back in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christys.
And I'm Mercy Muroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, good morning. It's 11:37 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Muroki, and Patrick Christys on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yes, indeed. Right. Now, of course, we can't ignore what's been going on with Boris Johnson. We don't want to ignore, actually, what's been going on with Boris Johnson's announcement about the migration, asylum system, etc. It involves Rwanda. It involves the Navy in the Channel. And we have got a guest on the line right now, MP John Speller. And John, thank you very, very much for joining us. I do understand, obviously, you were originally on, and we will talk about it, don't worry, about the NATO situation with Finland and Sweden. But look, in light of what we've just seen, huge announcement, years potentially in the making. What did you make of Boris Johnson's new migration asylum seeker policy there? What was your overbearing take from it, please, John?
Well, two quick points about it. One is, why announce it today when what should properly happen is this should have been at the House of Commons next week. Nothing is going to happen over the Easter weekend, and therefore it's clearly designed as what Linton Crosby calls a dead cat strategy. Throw a dead cat on the table so people will stop talking about Boris's crisis with not just the public, but also with his own backbenchers over Partygate. It's a pretty despicable way to deal with this, but also this extraordinary idea, continuing that they're carrying on with, about the Royal Navy taking over. Now, the Defence Committee, unanimous report, Labour and Conservative alike, we interviewed retired senior figures from the Navy who this is a ridiculous idea. The Navy is short of vessels for its normal activities anyway. It's short of manpower. And we're in an international crisis. And yet we want to divert people away from that to undertaking what is an important issue of stopping the boats across the Channel. But the Navy are not actually set up for this. They don't want it. Nobody can really understand it. I'm afraid it's just another gimmick, another diversionary tactic. Pretty shameful.
OK. Well, look, fair enough, absolutely. I mean, I guess in terms of that's your point of view. I suppose one thing that Boris Johnson said, didn't he, was, you know, well, he's got a plan and Labour absolutely haven't when it comes to this, and so maybe it would have been a way of getting around it. It's all very well and good criticising from the sidelines, isn't it, John? But there's no real Labour plan, is there? But
sidelines, we made very clear in the report, which, as I said, was agreed by Labour and Conservative unanimously, that the idea of the Navy taking over border protection was not a good idea. It's not what the Navy is set up for, and it's quite extraordinary in a major international crisis with very big increase in Russian naval activity in the Atlantic, and of course, as we've also seen in the Black Sea, to be trying to divert them from the real strategic defence role is just absurd. So this isn't just sort of sniping from the sidelines. We're taking that issue head on. And quite frankly, Boris Johnson hasn't listened because all he's interested in is a gimmick for today.
Well, let's move on now. Obviously, you are the Vice Chair of the House of Commons Defence Committee, former Defence Minister. That's very pertinent at the moment, to say the least. Can you just explain to many of our viewers and listeners what this issue is with Finland and Sweden and NATO? Because all of this will be pretty alien to the average man and woman on the street.
Yes, but it's enormously important. Sweden and Finland have been traditionally neutral countries. although they've got, particularly Finland, a strong defensive capability. But their geography, how close they are to Russia, they've always had to have a careful relationship with Russia. There's been a debate for a long while as to whether they should join, and they're partners with NATO. But I don't think that the public in those countries would have supported joining NATO and moving away from their traditional position. Fascinating thing that's happened is Vladimir Putin, by his actions, by his aggression, have obviously sent a very clear message that they've got to be involved in collective security through NATO. And in both countries now, there's a majority. In Finland, a 2-to-1 majority for joining NATO. It's for their protection, but also, of course, for protection of all the other members of European members of NATO, because in unity there's strength, and it's absolutely necessary given the appalling behaviour of the Russians.
Yes, no. But is there the risk of further aggression from Putin as a result of this? Because that seemed to be one of his big red lines, didn't he? I don't want NATO encroaching even further on my doorstep. And I suppose the irony of the way that he's behaved is he's almost forced that to happen, hasn't he?
But you see, look, the invasion of the Crimea did not take place in response to the Ukraine applying to join NATO. That was way, way off. It was when Ukraine applied for accession talks to the European Union. Because what Putin is really worried about with Ukraine is actually having a successful modern society next door, compared with his corrupt, bankrupt regime, only dependent on raw materials. And that's what he wanted to try and stop, and to put stooges in there in order to keep them compliant with it. The Ukrainians they want to decide their own destiny. And clearly, Finland and Sweden have made a similar decision. If they're to control their own destiny, they cannot do it on the whim of the Kremlin.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out, really, isn't it? And look, just in terms of what we're seeing at the moment with Putin and potential war crimes stuff and this, that and the other, do you think that actually there will be anyone brought to justice here, or do you expect that it's going to be a very, very difficult thing to do?
Well, I think it means that they certainly won't be able to travel anywhere, but also that countries all around the world will take the clear lesson: you cannot believe a word the Russians say. For example, they are guarantors, along with us, of the independence of Ukraine. When Ukraine, which had a sizable nuclear arsenal after the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, they gave up those nuclear weapons, and part of that was an international agreement to protect the sovereignty of Ukraine. Putin has just torn that up and thrown it in their faces. They all know you cannot rely on the word of the Kremlin, what they have to do, all of the countries in Europe, and you're seeing the way that countries have responded. Many ways quite different to 30-odd years of their previous defence doctrine. Look at how much Germany is now spending. There's a realisation that they need collective protection, and also a realisation that NATO is the most effective military alliance in history and the best way of securing that freedom to continue to run their own lives and their own countries.
Yes, and just very finally, lots of people in this country, when all this was emerging, they were saying, look, we need to, this raises questions about the size of our own army, the strength of our own army here abroad and how strong that is. People have been very critical about cuts to the size of the army, but do you think actually it's no longer about size? We shouldn't talk about size anymore. We should talk about how sophisticated our armed forces now are.
Modern equipment is absolutely vital, but people matter as well. Numbers matter as well. Resilience and morale. That surely is one of the lessons of the battle in Ukraine. The morale of the Ukrainian forces, and in order to undertake the number of roles and specialities that our armed forces, but particularly the army, have, that requires numbers above those ones that the government did in their integrated review. Quite frankly, that is now outdated. It should be reviewed very quickly and very rapidly, and to recognise that we actually need a critical mass of soldiers. That was what I said on Tuesday at the Policy Exchange meeting, and as you will have seen from the media, that was backed up by the outgoing head of the army, who recognised and is clearly having an internal discussion in government about the need for having sufficient numbers in order for the army to be able to do their job, for which they're immensely skilled, but they do need equipment, but they also need manpower.
Yeah, good stuff. All right. Well, look, thank you very much, John. Appreciate you making the time for us and deviating slightly there as well from what you were originally on to talk about. But that's the nature of the game, I'm afraid, isn't it? John Speller. OK, didn't hear that, but there we go. I'm sure it was complimentary. John Speller, thank you very much. Right, we're going to have a look at some of the views now. GBViews at gbnews.uk. As you can imagine, it's basically all about Boris's asylum seeker announcement. Wendy's been on. I think this is a step in the right direction. Labour criticised but have no solutions, drawing attention to this matter. Suggests the government is serious about it. A lot of people, of course, on the flip side of that, Wendy, I mean, I'm kind of with you, really, Wendy, but on the flip side of that, people are saying, well, oh, it's a distraction technique. Well, OK, if it is a distraction technique, I don't...
Blooming great. I was going to say another word. It was really a blooming great one, isn't it? And also, I do think, I mean, it's a bit of a cop-out, I think, to say it's a distraction strategy, because it's not like they just came up with it yesterday, is it, first of all?
Pulls out the back of a cigarette packet and he's got it written on it.
Yeah, but also, I mean, it has been the biggest, one of the biggest, if not the very biggest, issues of importance to the public for a number of years, this issue of immigration and tackling illegal immigration across the channel. So this idea that, oh, it's just, you know, smoke and mirrors, it's a distraction. Well, actually, you know what? He should be commended for what is a massive shift in the approach to dealing with illegal immigration, and one that will be very welcome, actually, by lots of people who voted for the Conservatives in 2019. Angie here does say, though, illegal immigration is a major problem to this country, and the announcement will hopefully deter illegal immigrants from trying to get here across the channel. So, what do the press do? They ask him about having a few drinks at his place of work that the majority couldn't care less about. Referring to journalists who decided to take that opportunity of the Prime Minister announcing a major shift in immigration policy to ask him about Partygate, which I actually think is quite irresponsible and just shows how out of touch they are with the vast majority of ordinary folk who I think actually do want to hear what the Prime Minister has to say about how their services are being crippled by their population growing so intensely, housing shortages, the money being spent. People care about these things, but then journalists just instantly sort of want to go to Partygate.
Ridiculous. Doesn't it just show you? So this announcement from Boris Johnson today, whether or not people agree with the rights or wrongs of it, it wasn't. This is the thing. It wasn't as if there wasn't enough stuff in that announcement there for the journalists in that room to get stuck right into it. You could go off it on loads of different things. Is it human rights abuse? Is it fair for these people? How is the Navy actually going to work in the Channel? What are our new accommodation systems going to look like? Is Rwanda a safe place for them to go? Is it going to help with national security? All of these things, right? The vast majority of the British public really, really care about. You know what the British public were not thinking about listening to that? Whether or not Boris Johnson ate some cake. It was absolute lunacy that they went after that.
Yes, well, keep your views coming in to us, GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll get to a few more. We've got about 10 minutes left on the programme, but we will get to a couple more before the end. But let's return to our main story today. Of course, that Rwanda immigration plan. The Royal Navy are also set to take over control of the British Channel from today. According to the Prime Minister, he said this as he was outlining his new plan to tackle illegal immigration. Asylum seekers who cross the English Channel in small boats could now be flown to Rwanda for processing under new government plans. That's what the Prime Minister revealed earlier.
Right, well, who best to talk about this than our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who is live for us now in Kent, where the Prime Minister has just been speaking. Mark, I was going to say, what's been going on? Where do you start? Go on, you take it away.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to absorb there. The government have been working on this for many months now, deeply, deeply frustrated by the increasing numbers of those who are crossing the English Channel, particularly in small boats, to try to get to the UK, and then, of course, to claim asylum. 28,500 last year, more than 5,000 this year already, which is significantly more than over the same period last year. And just yesterday, 600 crossed, and again today, more are coming. So they've got to do something. They know that they've got to do something, and the key plank of what was announced today was this processing of asylum seekers in Rwanda. I say processing, actually sending them to Rwanda, where if they're granted asylum, that is where they live. They won't be coming back to the UK. Let's get a bit more on this. We're joined by Kevin Saunders here at Lid Airport, where that press conference took place. Kevin is a former senior manager for Border Force over in France and chief of operations across in France for a few years. Kevin, you were at that news conference. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say?
I think what the Prime Minister said was an absolute winner. It's what we've been saying needs to happen for the last couple of years. The Prime Minister has obviously paid attention and he's brought it in. It will work. It's a very, very good idea.
Well, human rights groups are already lining up to say that this is cruel and inhumane, that they will challenge this in the courts. Is it even going to get off the ground?
It'll get off the ground. The government lawyers will defend it. I'm not an expert on human rights. I'm only an expert on immigration. And this is the way forward.
Do you think this is a disincentive, obviously, if those coming to the UK realise they ain't going to be spending any time in the UK apart from being processed initially and then sent to Rwanda?
Yes, it means that the migrants won't be forced to take this horrible crossing across the channel, which is very dangerous at the best of times. If they stay in Europe, they're going to be safe. They will be able to make a claim in Europe. If they do insist on coming to the UK, then they will be moved off to Rwanda, where their claim will be dealt with.
Well, the criminal gangs that are pushing these people across in ever-increasing numbers into the English Channel are nothing if not innovative. They'll find new ways, surely, of circumventing the UK authorities, won't they?
I'm sure the criminal gangs will try, which is why the Prime Minister has brought in the armed forces to take over, as of today, the running of the operation in the English Channel. This is, again, a very innovative move. The Navy will bring command and control to the channel, and with their aircraft and drones, they will be able to see what is coming across the channel and be able to intercept it. It's a very, very good move.
You're ex-Border Force, and I'm sure you don't want to do down your old organisation, but has this just got too big for them to control?
It's more than Border Force. We couldn't manage it on our own. We need help, and this is the help that will make it succeed.
And that help, I mean, the drones, they're being controlled here from this very airport, from Lid Airport, a fleet of drones. We're told that there's going to be £50 million made available for new vessels, as well as Navy Wildcat helicopters. That's certainly going to intercept them, but intercepting them has never really been the issue here, is it? They've always wanted to get into the hands of UK authorities.
Yes, they have, but now they won't want to get into the hands of UK authorities because they won't want to go offshore to Rwanda. So the Navy will be able to intercept those people that don't want to be intercepted.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Kevin Saunders, ex of Border Force, for joining us, having sat through that Prime Ministerial press conference just a half hour or so ago as well, and absorbing the details of this very significant move, the move by the British government in partnership and agreement with the Rwandan authorities, that those who land here, and these are single males, not women and children, but single males who land here illegally, having crossed either by boat in the channel or in the backs of lorries coming across the channel on those routes, may well find themselves heading off to Rwanda, where they will get no opportunity, if the British government has its way, of returning to the UK. Their new life will be in Africa.
Mark White, thank you very, very much for joining us from Kent, our home and security editor there. Wow, well, massive show that, wasn't it, for you all? And what do you make of this Rwanda deal? It's going to be dominating the press, dominating the headlines, loads of different elements of it to get stuck into. I'll be with you tomorrow morning to try and pick through that some more. We'll be back on Monday. Okay, there we go.
I suspect the top search today will be "Where is Rwanda?"
Where is Rwanda?
For people on Google. But anyway, yes, we'll see you on Monday, me and Patrick. But you are back tomorrow with Inaya Folau and Iman. Up next is the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Hello. Things are warming up for the start of the long weekend. Certainly today, it's getting a little warmer out there, dry and bright for the most part. And for Good Friday, it's also looking warmer still. High pressure is in control. It's not quite sitting right over us and keeping the weather fronts completely at bay. At times, these weather fronts are going to try and push in from the west, and certainly one today is bringing more cloud and a bit of patchy rain over the Western Isles, maybe on the west coast of the mainland of Scotland, and also maybe the far north of Northern Ireland, seeing a few spots of drizzly rain. But for the vast majority, it is dry. Quite a lot of cloud this morning, but it is melting away through the afternoon, and many places seeing some sunny spells. A few coasts in the west may stay a little misty and murky, and that'll suppress the temperatures. But in the sunny spells, high teens, low 20s possible across the southeast, so really quite warm. A little bit more of that showery rain drifting northwards across northern Scotland through the evening, but for the most, it'll be a dry night and a clear night. Cloud will start to increase once more across South Wales, southwest England, perhaps a little bit of mist and low cloud here and there first thing on Good Friday as temperatures drop down into high single figures, so not particularly chilly. And for most, Good Friday is looking like a dry and a bright day, probably more sunshine than today, certainly over the Midlands, northern England and northwest Scotland. Some patchy cloud further west, and we will see a lot of cloud for Northern Ireland, some showers breaking out here. 1 or 2 showers possible North Wales, and later on Northern England and southern Scotland could see a heavy shower, but they'll be pretty isolated. Most places dry and temperatures 22, maybe 23 Celsius across the southeast. A little cooler on some of these eastern coasts and with a bit more cloud further west. Still 1 or 2 of those showers moving in during Friday evening across southern and then central Scotland. A possibility of a heavier shower here for a time. 1 or 2 showers possible on Saturday, but most places again dry and bright. Some rain in Northern Ireland on Sunday and turning cooler with a bit more rain around by Monday.
Coming up tomorrow at noon.
Welcome to a very special GB News Easter programme. We are invited during this short time to enter into the passion, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's an invitation to take part in the most important part of the Christian life. Happy Easter. Alleluia.
The Meaning of Easter with Calvin Robinson tomorrow at noon on GB News.